Okay, so like Dr. Gerber said, my name is Erynn Kay. I'm a PA that works in family medicine. I'm also a restorative wellness practitioner and studying to be a nutritional therapy consultant through NTA. So what that equates to is that I'm a big nutrition geek. And that's why today I want to talk to all of you about the importance of food quality on a low-carb diet. Okay. Y'all ready? Food. Glorious low-carb food. If you're here at this conference, you already know the benefits of low carb. Better weight, less inflammation, lowered blood sugars, healthier skin, better moods. The list of benefits is long. But not every low-carb diet is implemented in the healthiest way, or in a way that allows us to obtain all of the nutrients that we need. There are basically right ways and wrong ways to do it. And so I want to look back to our ancestors to kind of help to show us how. We're going to start by talking a little bit about Dr. Weston Price, who I'm sure you're all familiar with. Dr. Price was a dentist.
I'd like to be a dentist.
Wrong dentist, sorry. I'm a big Christmas geek. So Dr. Price was a dentist who, while working with patients in the 1920s and 30s, noticed a correlation between development of tooth decay and eating a diet that was inadequate in nutrients. After seeing this year after year, he kind of wondered if isolated societies around the world that were eating more traditional foods had the same health issues as his patients eating modern diets. So in order to research this, he took off on a 9-year journey around the world. He traveled to 14 different regions, and he studied hundreds to thousands of people in each region, so not small sample sizes. What Dr. Price was looking for is what he called primitive racial stocks. And what this means is that he was looking for two groups of people that were very similar. They were genetically similar, living in similar regions, same climate, same altitude, same culture, that also hadn't mixed with other races. The only difference between these two groups is that one was still more isolated and therefore eating more traditionally prepared foods, and the other was more modernized and therefore eating more modern foods as well. And so what kind of attributes was Dr. Price looking for that would deem one healthy or not? Well, he was a dentist, so of course he started by looking at the teeth. He also was looking for wide facial bone structures to accommodate good dental arches. And you can see in these nice New Zealand people that were mentioned earlier this morning that the isolated population had obviously healthy teeth, wide facial bone structures, modernized not so much. And so Dr. Price was comparing the teeth in each situation, but he was also looking at other types of physical and mental illness as well. And not surprisingly, he found that essentially all types of illness were more common in those eating modern diets. What was interesting to me, though, is that he found that second and third generations were often much worse off than the first generations were that were eating kind of the same way. And second and third born children within a family were worse off than firstborn children. So obviously, the longer a population was on a modern diet and the more nutrient depleted that they became, the more grim things looked. Okay, so Dr. Price took thousands of pictures to document his findings, and he also took samples of food, soil, and saliva in each region and analyzed these for nutrient content. And what he found is that the soil and the saliva were much more mineral-rich in the isolated societies. So obviously these people were doing something right. There's a quote I like by Dr. Price on the isolated societies. He states, "In my studies, I find that it is not accident, but accumulated wisdom regarding food that lies behind their physical excellence and freedom from our modern degenerative processes." So what kind of diet results in the physical excellence that he speaks of to lead to freedom from modern illness? And before we talk about that, we have to talk about what the modern diets that he was looking at looked like. Basically, the modern diets included one or several of the following: white sugar, white rice, white flour, canned goods, syrups, jams, and vegetable oils. Yum! Sounds good. And so obviously there's a lot of refined and processed carbohydrates there, and that was a big part of the problem. But another issue is the food quality and the nutrients that were present. And so a lot of the more modern diets were lacking in nutrition. The characteristics of traditional diets were interesting. When he was comparing traditional diets, he found that there was a wide variety of foods consumed. Not all traditional diets looked the same. And there was a wide variety in the macronutrient content. But he did find the following commonalities. There were no refined or denatured foods consumed. All of the diets contained animal foods, so no vegetarian populations. And the whole animal was consumed, so they used bones to make broth and ate organ meat. Some of the animal foods were eaten raw. Raw liver, anyone? Perhaps with a nice Chianti? There were 4 times the minerals and water-soluble vitamins and 10 times the fat-soluble vitamins over the modern societies. There was a high content of enzymes and probiotics consumed because fermented foods were encouraged. Nuts, seeds, and grains, if they were consumed, were first soaked, sprouted, and fermented to neutralize any anti-nutrients like phytates. The fat content actually varied pretty widely among these diets. Anywhere between 30 and 80% were fat, but only 4% or less came from polyunsaturated oils. The omega-6 to omega-3 ratios were almost always 1-to-1. More on this later. Salt was used. We just learned about salt, right? Important. And I think this is really interesting. Provisions were made for future generations, meaning that the extra nutrient-dense foods like organ meats were preferentially given to parents-to-be, both the men and the women, and also to growing children and lactating women. This chart compares dental caries or cavities between the isolated and the modern societies within a region. You can see a big difference just in the quality of dental health. Okay. I'm going to briefly talk about Dr. Pottenger as well. Dr. Francis Pottenger was a physician working with patients in a tuberculosis sanitarium in the 1930s. He was extracting adrenal glands from cats to give the tissue to his patients with TB to help with their exhaustion. These cats were fed cooked meats, fish oil, and raw milk. And over time, there were so many adrenalectomies being performed that they were running out of food for the cats. So a meatpacking plant donated meat scraps, actually raw meat scraps, to the cause. And as such, some of the cats were receiving raw meat and some were receiving cooked meat. Otherwise, their diets were the same. Over time, it was found that the raw meat cats were a lot more spry and healthy. And this really intrigued Dr. Pottenger, so he kind of switched gears and started to do some research on the cats. He ran 2 types of studies. The first was the meat study, where again, half the cats received raw meat, half received cooked meat, otherwise the diet was the same. The other study was the milk study, where all of the cats received raw meat, but there were different experimental groups of cats. Some received raw milk, that was the control group. Others received pasteurized, some received evaporated, and some sweetened condensed. What he found is that the all raw cats were very healthy, but the cats that received cooked meat and the cats that received lower quality of milk started to suffer from some health issues. These cats developed narrow facial bone structures and poor dentition. Sounds kind of familiar, right? They also developed fractures, nervous behavior, poor fur quality, asthma, allergies. Had little sneezy, wheezy cats walking around. And Dr. Pottenger actually performed over 900 experiments on these cats, or performed experiments on 900 cats, over a 10-year period. And interestingly, he watched their offspring too, just like Dr. Price. And what he found is that the 2nd and 3rd generation cats were much worse off than the parents, even when the diet hadn't changed at all. The cooked meat cats couldn't even reproduce after 3 generations, just a bunch of stillborn cats. And once they switched the cats back to a raw diet, their health improved, but it took 4 generations of reproduction to create a fully healthy cat again. So obviously humans are not cats, but I think this experiment, or set of experiments, is important to kind of illustrate the importance of a species-appropriate diet. Or we're going to end up like these poor freaky cats and produce little freaky cat offspring. So hopefully now we're starting to see the importance of eating a whole, unprocessed, nutrient-dense diet, not only for our health, but for the health of future generations. Obviously, we're now exposed to more processed foods than ever before. And processing isn't always bad. I want to make that clear. Cooking is a form of processing. But here are some of the more negative ways that we alter our food. We pasteurize it, homogenize it, genetically modify it, partially hydrogenate it, spray it with pesticides and herbicides. We feed our animal proteins inappropriate things, chemically alter it, and we refine it. And so we won't talk about all of these today, but I do want to dive into more detail on some of these alterations. So we'll start with dairy for all you dairy lovers.
My milkshake brings all the boys to the yard, and they're like, it's better than yours.
I cannot help myself. If you know me, it's just, I can't. Pasteurization. So basically pasteurization is heat treating foods and beverages, usually milk, to help kill off any potentially disease-causing bacteria. And so that sounds good, right? Why would that be problematic? Well, you kill the bad bacteria, you kill the good bacteria with it, or the probiotics. Pasteurization will also denature live enzymes that are present in the dairy that help aid in the digestion of the milk. So if you don't have these enzymes, what do you end up with? You end up with lactose farts. Yeah. Okay. The Weston Price Foundation actually did an informal survey of over 700 families and found that over 80% of people that were diagnosed with lactose intolerance no longer had symptoms after switching to raw milk. Pasteurization denatures the immune complex proteins. It lessens the vitamins and minerals available for absorption. And because of these two issues, it increases the risk of several chronic diseases. This is a chart put together by the Weston Price Society showing some of these immune complex proteins that are now reduced or inactivated by pasteurization. There have been countless epidemiological studies out of Europe showing that children that are given raw dairy are much less likely to develop asthma, allergies, and autoimmune disease. And this is part of the reason why, are these immune complex proteins. But another reason why is that there are probiotics present in raw dairy. You might be familiar with the hygiene hypothesis that basically states that a low dose exposure to a wide variety of bacteria is beneficial to help balance our immune system. So it's best not to be overly hygienic. Another reason why asthma, allergies, and autoimmune disease are much less likely in farm folk is because there's a higher amount of omega-3 fats in full-fat grass-fed dairy. So if you can't get a hold of raw dairy, and I understand that can be a challenge, look for full-fat grass-fed to get the anti-inflammatory omega-3 benefit. So on this chart, you can see breast milk and raw milk, lots of active immune factors, whereas pasteurized, ultra-high temperature pasteurized, and infant formula, this just is not the case. This chart shows several of the vitamins and minerals that are now much less available after we pasteurize dairy. And I won't go into detail here, but I just want to point out, milk is a very healthy food, or at least dairy, and look what we're doing to it just by pasteurizing it. We're reducing the nutrient content so much. Okay, another dairy issue is homogenization. What is that? Basically, you can see in the magnified raw milk picture, there's these nice fat globules present. And when we homogenize the dairy products, basically we're shaking it up so that the liquids and the solids blend together or emulsify. Basically, this is done to extend the shelf life and also to make milk or dairy products kind of more palatable because there's a smooth consistency. It's kind of cosmetic. It's like a milk nip-tuck, if you will. So it's problematic because, as I said, you can see the fat globules. There's a little membrane around each fat globule, and when we rapidly shake up the dairy, this all breaks apart. And so the fat globules are now more exposed and have a high likelihood of being oxidized. And we know oxidation leads to inflammation in the body. Also, now the fats and the calcium in the dairy can interact unnaturally. And when this happens, it's very irritating to the gut, and it can make vitamins, minerals, and proteins up to 6-fold less absorbable. So homogenization, just like pasteurization, makes dairy less nutritious. There are also little sugar chains in each of the membranes that act as a signal to the immune system to say, hey, this is a safe food to eat. But now that we've ruined this, the immune system might see the dairy protein as foreign and attack it. And when that happens, you can develop a dairy protein intolerance, leaky gut, digestive distress, all kinds of issues. So the question with our dairy is, should we shake it?
Shake it, shake it, shake it, shake it, shake it, shake it like a Polaroid picture.
No, we definitely should not shake it. All right? Okay. Let's talk about fats and oils. So, partially hydrogenated or trans fats, these started in 1911 with a little product called Crisco. Basically, food manufacturers were looking for a way to transport liquid fats and make them more shelf-stable, so they chemically altered them into solids to do so. These chemically altered products can unfortunately incorporate themselves into our cell membranes. You think perhaps this might affect the way our cells function? We can find trans fats on autopsy in the body, which is also pretty freaky. You can see it in the arteries, in the heart, and the liver. It raises your LDL, lowers your HDL. Luckily for us, it's now been recognized as unsafe, and the label on foods must indicate if there's greater than 0.5 grams per serving. But of course, if there's less than 0.5 grams per serving and you're eating processed foods, you might still be ingesting some trans fats. Now trans fats have largely been replaced with vegetable oils, and that sounds like it should be healthy. But as we know, vegetable oils, for the most part, aren't even made from vegetables. They're made mostly from soy, canola, cottonseed, corn, and they're usually genetically modified. It takes a lot of processing to make a vegetable oil. You need high heat, you need chemicals, you need processes like deodorization and degumming and bleaching. I mean, it's quite a work of art to make a vegetable oil. And when we process the crud out of these oils, it's really hard on the fat. So if you think about plants for a minute, plants have protective mechanisms in place, like seeds have shells, for example. And oftentimes there's an antioxidant like vitamin E packaged right along with it. So all of these things are to protect the fat, which is very delicate. Now that we've processed this, high likelihood that these oils will oxidize easily, contributing to any kind of inflammatory issue in your body. Vegetable oils also have a very poor omega-6 to 3 ratio, of around 20:1, where we're really wanting a 1:1 ratio. So I've kind of talked about this omega-6 to 3 ratio a little bit, but why do we even care about this ratio? Well, omega-6 and 3 fats, they're both polyunsaturated fats. They're essential fatty acids. We need them both. But they have an inverse relationship in the body. If you have a lot of one, you can't have a lot of the other. So, for example, omega-6 fats, if you have a lot of omega-6 fats, they are building blocks for pro-inflammatory prostaglandins. And if you don't have a lot of omega-3 fats, you don't have enough building blocks for anti-inflammatory prostaglandins. So your inflammatory cascade gets out of balance. We need both, but balance is key. Vegetable oils are often used as cooking oils in restaurants. That's a really bad idea. When we heat these oils, they further acidify, causing byproducts like, formaldehyde. I mean, formaldehyde, guys, this is what they store dead bodies in. So when we heat vegetable oils, it turns out they're actually worse for us than the trans fats were to begin with. So obviously, those of us on low carb, we're not going out of our way to eat vegetable oils. But if you're eating out on a regular basis, you're probably consuming these oils. Okay, so moving on to animal protein quality. I want to get one thing straight right off the bat. And there's a little controversy here perhaps, but ruminants, like cows, are meant to eat grass. And chickens and pigs are omnivores. They eat plants and animals, like bugs. But none of these animals naturally eat grain. And oftentimes that is what is fed to them before they are slaughtered and fed to us. When an animal eats grain, the nutrient profile of its tissue is altered. For example, cows that are fed corn are often deficient in tryptophan, which is an essential amino acid that helps keep us happy. Basically, if you are eating an animal protein that has altered nutrients, you're getting what is in that tissue. And so therefore, you are what you eat eats, in other words. With grass-fed and grain-fed, there's essentially the same amount of monounsaturated fats, polyunsaturated fats, and saturated fats. The difference lies in the type of polyunsaturated fats, so the omega-6 and 3 fats again. Grass-fed has 2 to 5 times the omega-3 fatty acids over grain-fed, making the omega-6 to 3 ratio about 1.5 to 1, which is pretty good. Whereas grain-fed meats, the ratio is more like 7 to 1, not ideal. There was a 4-week study done in Ireland comparing those eating grass-fed and grain-fed meats. And during this time, they were otherwise fed essentially the same diet. And the people that were receiving the grass-fed meats received about 18 milligrams a day more omega-3s from the meats they were eating than those eating the grain-fed. And that's not that much of a difference. But then the blood of the test subjects was analyzed to look at their omega-6 to 3 ratio. And what was found is over that 4-week period, the grass-fed people on average started with an omega-6 to 3 ratio of 9 to 1 and finished after 4 weeks on grass-fed with a ratio of 6 to 1. Whereas the grain-fed started with a ratio on average of 8 to 1 and after 4 weeks finished with 12 to 1. So a difference. Okay, so if this omega-6 to 3 ratio isn't enough to kind of convince you of the superiority of grass-fed over grain-fed, there's more. Grass-fed has 2 to 5 times more conjugated linoleic acid, or CLA, than grain-fed. And what this is, it's a beneficial, healthy fat that acts as a strong antioxidant in the body. We know it has anti-cancer properties and is beneficial against heart disease. There are more vitamins and minerals in general in grass-fed, including others that act as antioxidants, vitamin C, vitamin E, glutathione. And I don't know about you, but I'm looking for all of the antioxidant support in this modern world that I can get. When it comes to chickens and eggs, pasture-raised is really the label that you're looking for, because chickens that are housed indoors don't have a lot of access to green leafy things, and therefore the omega-3 in their tissues will suffer. And eggs that are pasture-raised have up to 19 times the omega-3 over non-pastured eggs. So big difference there as well. We don't, unfortunately, have time to go into animals being fed hormones and antibiotics and feed that's covered in herbicides and pesticides, and I would love to talk about it. But know that if you are buying a higher quality animal protein, you are much less likely to be exposed to these toxins. Okay, we're just going to briefly run through a few food labels of healthy low-carb foods. And so all of these labels came from low-carb diet sites that were saying that these were perfectly acceptable to eat on your low-carb plan. In the back, these will be really hard to read, but I will help you out with the big ideas here. Okay, the top left label is a low-carb protein bar. The very first ingredient is soy nuggets. Enough said, moving on. The second label here, this is a heavy cream, it's non-organic, ultra-pasteurized, has some added chemicals like polysorbate 80, not ideal. Third label is a mayonnaise, again with the soybean oil. Also has some sugar, some other chemicals. Trust me, there are better mayonnaise products on the shelves that you don't have to make. The fourth label here is a salad dressing, again with the soybean oil. Non-fat buttermilk, we know we shouldn't be eating anything non-fat, right? Cornstarch, so make your own salad dressing, tastes much better. The bottom left is a diet soda. Call you diet soda drinkers out. Contains caramel color, aspartame, phosphoric acid, all kinds of things your body has no idea what to do with. But these will leach minerals right out of your bones. The bottom center are fast food burgers with no bun. Really unappealing picture. But so sure, this is low carb, but think about the quality of the animal proteins. Think about the oils that these are cooked in. And finally, the bottom right is a low carb shake. Again, soy, seed oils, chemicals. I mean, damn, this is gross, right? Are you with me? This is really gross. Yeah. So you can do low carb like this by eating frankenfood, and it will derail your health, but you can also do it so much better. Okay, so now we've seen all these ways that we alter our food to make it less healthy, less nutritious, but are there foods we can eat or ways we can alter our food to make the nutrients more bioavailable? Absolutely there is. Dr. Price, as we remember, those characteristics of traditional diets, had all kinds of ways that we could make our diets more healthy. So that's kind of where we're going here. And I really like what Dr. Kate Shanahan calls the 4 pillars of world cuisine, which kind of nicely summarizes the Dr. Price principles for easy understanding. So this first pillar of world cuisine is to eat meat that's cooked on the bone. Why would that even matter? So when we cook proteins, sometimes the nutrients can become slightly less available to us because now there's a lot more work that we have to do to chew and digest the protein. And then if we really char our foods, and I know some of us do this, then the proteins can turn into carcinogens. But if we cook meat on the bone itself has minerals present that helps protect the protein from the cooking process. And that includes if you char it a little bit. And this is even more beneficial if you cook it slowly and with water, like in a slow cooker. And then, the best part is that once you eat the meat, you can use the bones and make bone broth. The second pillar here is to eat your organ meat. So liver is the organ in the body that will store excess nutrients when you have them, oftentimes. And so liver is this nutritional powerhouse. With organs, like treats like, and what that means is if you're eating brain, it's going to benefit your brain. And this is kind of obvious, it's intuitive, because if these are the parts of the body that need these nutrients to function, that's where we're going to find them, and they're going to benefit the same body part in us. Organ meats are also often pretty cheap, but they're going to be a lot better for you than almost any vitamin supplement on the market. The third pillar here is to incorporate some raw animal and plant material. So this is a picture. We got raw fish, raw veggies. Basically, raw foods have a lot of antioxidants present. And so we know that cooking has benefits. We as humans have benefited from the cooking process. But sometimes to get the antioxidants in, we need to incorporate some more raw plant and animal foods as well. So my recommendation is to get a little bit of cooked and a little bit of raw of both. Think back to what we talked about earlier with dairy. We already know raw dairy is a good idea, but raw meat, does that kind of freak you out? No? I see some no. I love this crowd. So occasionally it's good to get in a more rare steak or some sashimi to benefit from the raw meats. And if you think back to those raw meat cats, they fared a little bit better too. And finally, the last pillar here is to soak and sprout foods and also to ferment foods. And so soaking and sprouting, nuts and seeds, for example, as that's something that low carbers eat, if you soak and sprout these, the enzymes are released, and then you get more nutrients out of the food. Fermentation allows the bacteria to help break down the starches and sugars in a food, so it makes it lower carb. And then also you get the beneficial vitamins from the fermentation process, like B12 or K2. Both sprouting and fermenting will lessen anti-nutrients, like phytates or tannins, so it makes them more digestible and less irritating to our gut. And then finally, of course, fermentation. If you eat fermented foods, that's a great source of probiotics, good for your gut. Okay, so obviously, going low carb is kind of number one priority, but if you've already done that and you haven't incorporated one or all of these food preparation techniques or these types of foods, go for it to kind of really up your nutritional game. This chart shows some of the more common nutrient deficiencies that a lot of us are suffering from. And I've bolded the fat-soluble vitamins on the top because that is the most common type of the common nutrient deficiencies. And I want to point something out, that on that far right column are foods highest in nutrients. There's a lot of redundancy here. You'll see organ meat over and over again. You'll see fish, green leafy vegetables, and eggs so many times. I mean, you guys, Mother Nature was no dummy. She put these nutrients in foods that we as humans are meant to be eating. So why are we all so nutrient depleted to begin with? Well, we already talked about refined foods and lack of variety in our foods. All of that will contribute to being nutrient depleted. But there's also a big issue related to soil quality. Our soils are over-farmed, and because of that, we are not producing produce that has enough nutrients, and then the animals that we eat aren't able to eat these nutrient-rich foods as well. So even if you're eating a very healthy diet, you still have the potential to develop some nutritional deficiencies. And that's a problem, because nutritional deficiencies can contribute to or lead to almost any kind of chronic illness that we face. We need good nutrition for basic cellular function. And I kind of want to touch on the weight loss factor too, because if you are struggling with weight loss, could it partially be because you are nutrient depleted? It's possible. Because if you're nutrient depleted, the body will have more cravings, and it will say, hey, you need to eat more and more to get what I'm looking for. So this can definitely derail weight loss progress. And then there's the issue of if you become pregnant and you are nutrient depleted, will it affect your offspring? Well, that's possible too. If you remember that Dr. Price isolated societies, they had programs in place for parents-to-be. They gave them extra nutrient-rich foods because these people innately knew they didn't want to create several generations of Pottenger's cats. Still awake, right? Okay. So, I encourage all of you to become nutrient seekers and pay attention to food quality. If you're not already, incorporate more organic, more pasture-raised, a little bit of raw, some grass-fed, sprout something, ferment something, drink broth, and eat organ meat. Look to your wise ancestors, find that nutritional golden snitch, and feel better than ever before. Thank you.